So then Grant Cardone comes out. He announced this on X, aka Twitter. Dear Cardone Capital Team, immediately discontinue all underwriting of New York City real estate, he tweeted. The risk outweighs the opportunities at this time. Recent political decisions will continue to deteriorate prices and benefit states that don't have these challenges.
Is there something going on here in the New York area? Because after Donald Trump's $454 million civil fraud verdict, Grant Cardone says he won't invest in NYC anymore. And now the largest Canadian pension fund sells office building for $1.
So New York judge hands Donald J. Trump a crushing defeat in his fraud case, finding the former president liable for conspiracy to manipulate his net worth and ordering him to pay a penalty of nearly $355 million plus interest, which could wipe out his entire stockpile of cash. So Trump's fraud penalty will exceed $450 million based on the interest it has started accruing. It accuses Trump and his associates of misstating valuations on financial statements for personal gain, which is made up of three separate penalties, one for $168 million, another one for $126.8 million, another one for $60 million. This is what's crazy. The interest alone on this judgment is $111,984 a day, almost $112,000 a day, according to New York Attorney General Letitia James. Then that's who brought the case against Trump. Whether he did this or didn't do this, personally to me, is irrelevant. We're going to get into how this affects real estate, what this means for real estate, what this means for the New York area. New York Attorney General Letitia James sued Trump and his business associate, including his sons, for fraud in 2022, alleging they had fraudulently inflated the value of their assets in order to obtain more favorable business deals. So here's what is really interesting. The judge who presided over this case ignores the fact, whether this is a crime or not, so allegedly, that this was, if there was a crime, that this was essentially a victimless crime because everyone was repaid. And then the bank said, yes, we would do business with Mr. Trump and his associates again. So I think Kevin O'Leary really said this best. He said, remember, there was no money lost. There's no victim here. So essentially just under $500 million fine for a situation where no money was lost and the harmed party, supposedly the banks, were fully paid back, he said. We're wondering, does this make sense? Asking ourselves, how long will it take for the appellate courts to bring this down to a reasonable number? And I have no idea what that is. So is he saying New York, NYC, you're scaring investors. You're scaring capital markets. Judge, and this is my words, not his words. Judge, are you an appraiser? Are you a real estate professional? How do you know what valuations happen? Now, and also, isn't it the bank's interest to go do their own investigation, to then pay for their own independent financial analysis to figure out, is this property worth doing? And is Trump and his associates worth taking the risk on? What then Kevin O'Leary starts talking about is now he's very concerned about the next step of seizing assets. And he's made a reference to the effect of this is starting to sound like Venezuela. This is another country when we're going to start taking assets from Americans. This should sound a little crazy. The reporter's sitting there just trying to cut him off, and he's just charging forward. Capital comes to America because of the stability of our justice system, O'Leary said. This is not stable in terms of many people's eyes domestically and internationally by seizing assets like it happens in Venezuela. It doesn't happen in New York, so this is a little scary. What he says is going to happen is you're going to start to see an exodus of capital leaving New York. Doesn't matter if you're a Republican, doesn't matter if you're a Democrat. Let's play this through. You go make an investment to build a building or to buy a multifamily, and then later on a judge decides they don't like you. They decide that the bank doesn't know what they're doing. And they decide, even though all loans were paid back, that they're going to come after you, Benji, and sue you for your money you put there. Are you likely to put money in that state?
Or I'm definitely going to be more hesitant.
I'm not going to put $1 there.
Yeah, just go somewhere else where you're not going to have any issues.
So then Grant Cardone comes out, jumps on the bandwagon, and he says, if this ruling and that penalty do not get overturned, it could become a precedent that means all borrowers everywhere are at the risk of the same thing happen to them. And you have to think about how our judicial system works. What happens is a ruling happens, and that creates case law. When that case law happens, there's now precedent for other cases to follow that. So he takes it to the nth degree and says, well, if it happened in New York, it could start to happen everywhere. Might be a little much, but it's a good soundbite. And then he goes on to say that prices of properties will continue to fall in New York City as more and more institutions, investors, and pension funds refuse to invest there. Investors and those seeking on behalf of the others, they have a fiduciary responsibility to invest in markets where you assume the future values are going up with some measure of confidence. He announced this on X, aka Twitter. Dear Cardone Capital Team, immediately discontinue all underwriting of New York City real estate, he tweeted. The risk outweighs the opportunities at this time. Recent political decisions will continue to deteriorate prices and benefit states that don't have these challenges. Then we had that pension fund. That article just came out. That was just released. I'm like, oh my goodness, is everyone leaving New York? So I had to dig into it, and I found out that pension fund actually sold that office building in Manhattan for $1 to the other partner to take on $46 million worth of debt. That happened at the latter part of 2023. So that was happening before. But there's already problems happening in commercial real estate in New York City. There's already problems happening in these very hardcore blue states with their commercial real estate because of the regulations being put on them. In our area locally, this was said to me 2 weeks ago, someone said, man, did you see how much of Amazon moved out of downtown Seattle over to Bellevue? And I said, yeah, Bellevue doesn't have a head tax like downtown Seattle has a head tax. So when corporations are really big and they have a lot of money, they can just shutter their workforce down and just move over to the not even 15 minutes. It's like 10 minutes away across a bridge. So they just close down shop there and move right over here. What they're saying here, and what concerns me and what investors need to pay attention to, is not Republican, Democrat. That's a whole war of words in itself. Is the fact that a bank did its due diligence and a court said the bank was wrong and there was no loss to the bank, and now someone's being sued. That scares me. That should scare every investor. And you need to put your money in places where it's going to be safe and be allowed to grow and not be inhibited by the courts or outside regulation who may or may not be on a potential witch hunt.